Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And I'm very thankful and pleased to have the opportunity to tell you a bit about the French situation. And before I start, I think I should apologize to the interpreters because they couldn't have my presentation in advance. I hope it's going to fit. And yeah, I will try to tell you about the French situation. And I think that before I get into details of the current plans and so on, I should bring you a bit of explanation on where French politics on nuclear energy stand, because if you don't get that global picture, you don't really understand where we are heading to. First of all, but that is, I think, well known by everyone, I just want to remind you that France is a kind of champion when it comes to nuclear, with a lot of French facilities and integrated so-called fuel cycle industries, 56 reactors altogether, and one being built. We'll talk about it later. You might, I mean, it's worth noticing that they are heading to almost to 40 years of operation on average. Beside that, of course, this weight of the nuclear industry has a lot of importance in French economics and policy making. Having said that, one very important part of the framework is the political turnaround that we've seen over the last 10 years. If you remind what the previous French president said before he was elected, François Hollande, he committed to reduce French dependency on nuclear power, and that came with some decisions like capping the installed capacities, starting to shut down some reactors, and it actually shut down 2 of them, the oldest ones, in Fessenheim by 2020, and reducing the share of electricity, of nuclear power in electricity. So these were the decisions in 2012. But then we had our new president who started committing to stick to that plan, but then changed his mind and said in 2022 that we need to, that of course, nuclear power is part of the ecological future of France and Europe, and that we need to go back, that's what he said in a very famous speech in February 22, that we need to go back to go back on track on the great adventure of French nuclear power. And this came with a turnaround of decisions, with a plan to extend the life of all reactors, with the decision to start a new program of buildings of new EPRs, and possible plans to build some of these small modular reactors. The question is, why such a turnaround, and what does it mean, of course, for nuclear export capacity, which is the main issue today? I mean, to understand what is at stake, I think we need to understand that there's a kind of political lock-in in France when it comes to nuclear energy policy making. And I would start by emphasizing that this lock-in, I mean, the continuation of the French nuclear policy is justified, you can see on the left, by French President Macron, on the right by former Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne, justified by the idea that there is no alternative to keeping the nuclear power program going and starting new build to meet our climate objectives. So there's a kind of denial that a 100% renewables program is possible and compatible with electricity security and climate objectives, which is very strange because we have some scenarios. I mean, one by négaWatt, which is a non-institutional one, but some by very official agencies, like the French Energy Agency ADEME and the French grid operator RTE. And these reports, which Macron and Elisabeth Borne had when they made those statements, include some 100% renewable scenarios and show that this is compatible with our climate and electricity security objectives. So there's a kind of denial, which leads me to say that this is not obviously the reason why they would stick to nuclear plants. And I think we have three main issues in that political lock-in. The first one is the military motive, not very often told about, but very important. And again, Macron in 2020 said very clearly, we can't have nuclear power without military nuclear or the other way around, so that's crystal clear. And there was a confidential report that was later declassified in last year, which is about maintaining the nuclear new build capacity from a military and civilian perspective. And this report that was filed in 2018 clearly says that the key to maintain that capacity, including from a military perspective, is to decide on a new program of 6 EPR reactors. So that's the first point. The second one is what we call the cliff effect, and you can see what it looks like. That is figuring the pace of shutting down reactors if we would stick on the left to 40 years of operation and on the right to 50. You can see that this means shutting down a lot of reactors in a very short time, and that is a concern first because, of course, I mean, since 80% of the reactors have been started in 10 years, we would need to shut down all of them. But due to, in particular, the share of electric heating in the French electric system, we have a high dependence on capacity in winter times. So shutting down even one reactor is a concern. So you can think of 56. And it's also a concern for EDF, of course, from a financial perspective, because that means turning an asset which brings revenues to decommissioning expenses. And therefore, because shutting down one reactor is already difficult, shutting down 56 is just postponed. And one of the quotes in that presentation, which I favor, is that one from the former EDF CEO back in 2018. And he said that EDF is like a cyclist who has to pedal not to fall. And what he meant is we need a life extension, we need new programs, because otherwise the whole nuclear program and EDF's finances are at risk of collapsing, which led to this Grand Carénage program where EDF is committing to a life extension beyond 40 years of all reactors. The official estimate by EDF of the cost is 50 billion euros to get that done. The French Court of Accounts corrected this to 100 billion euros, and that is still probably underestimated. The third one is the too big to fail excuse. EDF needs to get going, of course, and nobody thinks the French government would let it collapse, which actually led to renationalizing it last year. And this is how the French Minister of Economy justified it. We need to do that to enable EDF to accelerate on a new nuclear project. But the actual reason is much simpler. You can see here, and that I think these figures, or at least these reasoning stand, a summary of what the Court of Account found about the overall cost of the nuclear program back in 2012. The past investments, current operation, and estimated legacy costs. In very short term, it points to the fact that ongoing costs are increasingly up for operating and maintaining the fleet, while future costs are uncertain and rising, which of course leads EDF to a projected situation of increasingly non-profitable assets turning massively into heavy liabilities. Which is, of course, something a company couldn't cope with, which is the explanation, if you add to this, that the financial situation of EDF is very difficult, with a financial net debt over 50 billion euros, which leads to this life extension, to postpone liability, and the need to raise financial input through new build, but the question mark of finding ways to finance it. Then we go to the current situation, which you could mostly summarize in terms of wishful thinking. Again, this quote from Macron back in 2022 and the objectives that this led to: lifetime extension, possibly to 60 years, 6 EPR2, possible SMRs. This is how the nuclear industry or the French Safety Authority reacted to those announcements very shortly after Macron made it. The head of the French nuclear safety said the industry is not in position to deliver safely on the objectives the government is setting. And Bernard Dorzuc, the head of the French Nuclear Safety Authority, said we need a Marshall Plan to bring capacities up to the objectives. And then the then CEO of EDF also called for a Marshall Plan, which is a very strong wording, I think, which tells you about the current situation of the industry. So first, before Macron's statement, we are in a situation where the industry was calling for objectives and said the objectives were missing to maintain or sustain capacities. But then they said, okay, we know capacities are missing to meet the objectives. The funny thing, if you want, is that since that series of quotes, objectives have been, the industry has been rising the bar of objectives with new plans, new projects, new export projects, and so on. No one seems to consider that we could adjust objectives to capacities rather than the other way around. And we are like in that situation where there's no reality check anymore about capacities. Which brings me to the second part of that presentation, which is about what I would call altogether the implementation gap. And I will start with the performance gap, which is a kind of just glimpse on the French situation, the way the nuclear fleet is performing. Again, a quote by then Minister of the Energy Transition, Agnès Pannier-Runacher. She said back in October 23 that we need to count on 30% more nuclear electricity than today by 2030, which of course was a way to call for getting back on track, considering the fact that the performance of the nuclear fleet has been really bad over the past years, and particularly bad over the year 2022, when the performance was actually disastrous, as you can see on that graph. The graph represents the evolution through years of the overall performance monthly on the left, and in terms of overall electricity generated on the right. The current, we had a very bad experience in 22 again, with a load factor that went down almost to only 50%, which is really bad. But when you look at the overall figure, it's not only that year that was bad. We are faced with a double trend. The first one is a global decrease in the overall performance. The second one is an increasing uncertainty on a year-to-year production, and that is, of course, a concern. And the reason is bad quality and safety issues altogether. Second gap is the gap in terms of capacities and particularly human resources. Another quote from the same Minister of Energy Transition a bit earlier, last year. She said, we need to recruit and train on a massive scale. And she gave some numbers that were taken out of this report, which is a report by the group of nuclear industry companies in France. And this report, I mean, you can see here some numbers. This is the projected needs of new jobs and therefore new hirings over the next few years to cope with the objectives. And at that time, the objectives were the first one I showed, set by Macron in February 22. For instance, one of the striking figures is that to meet the number of new engineers the nuclear industry thinks it needs, it would need to recruit 10% of all the new engineers that are, coming out of schools every year in France. And there's no discussion on how they would miss in other sectors. So that's not likely to happen, but still, these are the figures that the industry is using. And of course, that is before new domestic and export projects. Third implementation gap is regarding the exportation, and I like to get back to that quote from 2010 by François Roussely. He was not anymore CEO of EDF at that time, but he has been before. And in a report to then President Sarkozy, after France failed to export some reactors in the Emirates, I think, he said that the plans, the overall projections are of 20 to 30 gigawatts of new capacity to be built every year on the world market, and that an ambitious player like France should aim for 1/4 of that. The reality of French exports is much worse than that. Altogether, when you look only at the reactors, not reactors where the French industry was part of, but the real export by the French industry as such, France only exported 13 reactors and not many new ones. I mean, most of it are old projects. When you look at the current situation where the French industry is on track to deliver one new reactor every 10 years, that's what Luc Rémont, so the current CEO of EDF, said recently. The current level is one every 10 years, and the plan is to get to 2 every year. Very ambitious and not very realistic. Interesting to look at this leaked letter from the French government. So that's a letter by the Ministry of Economy as the owner of EDF and the head of the Energy and Climate Department. And they said the capacity of the French nuclear industry and EDF to carry all the projects, including exporting projects simultaneously, must be studied in a consolidated manner. So in very polite terms, that means we don't trust EDF's capacity to export as it plans to. Fourth implementation gap goes with completion of project, and I told you I would tell a bit more about the EPR being built in Flamanville. Another very funny or astonishing quote by EDF, another former CEO of EDF, Henri Proglio. So in 2022, and he was in charge when the EPR project started. He said, this thing is virtually unbuildable. Okay. This is, the graph summarizes the 13 altogether new announcements about EDF on delays and overcost of the Flamanville project. And you can see on the table that these over delays and overcosts are not only for Flamanville, it also applied to Olkiluoto that was built by France, and it applies to Hinkley Point C, which is still going. Altogether, that is for the existing reactors being built, and I just want to say a word about new plans and where the design work in particular stands when we are talking about new EPR2 or EPR 1200. The EPR2s that France is planning to build at home aim for a so-called simplified design to reduce costs, which brings a risk of safety recession. I could bring you some details if you want. It's still in a very early design phase that needs to be emphasized. The generic license is not planned before at some point next year. So a lot of design of generic design is still going on. And the projected completion of these reactors is not planned by France before 2035 at the very most optimistic estimate. When it comes to these EPR 1200 that France is proposing to export, especially here, it's based on the same simplified design, just with 3 secondary loops instead of 4, which means it's still in a very early phase. And EDF presented a so-called dossier d'options de sûreté, so it's a very basic safety options that was approved, but it's still very early and it's not a clear regulatory step. So again, this is still very far from detailed design. Fifth and before last implementation gap, trust and quality. We had a series of very big issues with quality and possibly fraudulent behavior. We had all these forged files at Creusot with the manufacturing of heavy components of the French nuclear reactors. You can see some numbers in the graph. I don't detail them. We had a lot of problems also with the building of the EPR in Flamanville, and some of them, when it comes to quality of the pressure vessel, of weldings, of the secondary circuits, or some parts of the primary circuits, really relate to quality issues, which brings safety issues. And we can witness, we can question whether what is a combination of a civil loss of competencies and some fraudulent intention. But in any case, the question is who is responsible, and we still don't have answers to that, and nobody is taken responsible for this. More recently, the head of the French Nuclear Safety Authority said that in spite of some progress, ASN still witnessing recurring weaknesses in industrial rigor, and that we are it is faced with still a lot of cases of falsification and counterfacting that needs to be better addressed. On top of that, we have some non-transparency issues. There's a current trial involving former EDF CEO Henri Proglio, again, on non-transparent and favoritism over some consultancy contracts. Finally, the financial gap. Here I want to stress that there's a lot of discussion going on in France on how to finance the current fleet and its life extension. The chairwoman of the French CRA, so that the Commission for Regulation of Energy, said that, she witnessed that the costs are rising, and she said we need to find a framework, and she said it was aimed for by the end of last year. At that time, the French Prime Minister also said she requested EDF to propose the lowest possible average price for that framework. I'm not going into details of the figures below. It just shows that the current estimate is that the cost of operating the nuclear fleet is much higher than it used to be, and that it was estimated before. And there's a lot of very difficult discussion going on, and the government has still not found a way to design a financing scheme that would be that would fit market, French and European market rules to finance the existing fleet. When it comes to new nuclear projects, again, a very strange quote by current EDF CEO. He was asked whether he knows about the future cost of new reactors. He said, well, I refuse to have a fixed idea at this stage, which is very strange because EDF has started even contracting to build these 6 new EPRs. So we will see. The objective that was set for the EPR2 is already clearly not likely, and even meeting this objective of 70 euros per megawatt hour would still not be competitive on the long term on the European market. The first official estimate for this new EPR2 was 46 billion, but already some government documents that leaked show that the more so-called realistic estimate by the government is 64, and that will, of course, still rise. Coming to some conclusions, the first part is, again, back to a quote by Minister of Economy Bruno Le Maire, and he should know because he's there since 2017. I think he's the only minister which has never changed under Macron. And yeah, he calls for France to come back with some puissance, meaning power, energy power, political power, economic power. And so that is the situation, but France is actually rooted, I mean, the call for this renaissance is rooted in political lock-in that have little to do with climate and energy policy. Before the 2022 decisions, the nuclear industry was struggling with obvious sign of a deep crisis. As by magic, it just forgot about it and started dreaming of a lot of new projects away from any reality check. But the reality is that even Bruno Le Maire very recently in a public hearing said that even building 6 EPR2 is a project of a gigantic scale, and he thinks that is the overall reasonable amount that should be set for the French nuclear industry, which means that because this implementation gap is wide and the industry is still lacking the capacities, market conditions, financial resources to deliver, EDF will even struggle to meet the minimum objectives that are set on a domestic basis. And of course, when it comes to exports, EDF can't provide and guarantee any of the quality deadlines or costs that it would commit to when discussing with foreign customers. Thank you.
Děkuji moc.
Thank you very much. Now, there will be a question, room for 1 or 2 questions. But before, I will have one question that is a follow-up to your presentation about funding. What is your opinion on about the French experts, about the ability of the EDF being able to build the nuclear power plant block in Czechia and cheaper than what is in Hinkley Point C?
It can't happen. I mean, EDF can commit to many things, but I mean, I think the picture is clear, and it can't. I mean, it can't deliver on promising cost and delays and deadlines. I mean, they've been doing that before with many players, and they are still trying. And maybe a figure I could give to illustrate that is the current discussion about Sizewell C or B, no, C, Sizewell C, sorry, in the UK. where EDF wants to build 2 EPRs and is struggling to find finances, and the UK government is struggling. I mean, the latest estimate that was provided in January brings the construction costs to something like 16,000 euros per kilowatt, which is to compare with the current plan for EPR2s of 6,000 euros, and the worst estimate that is used in France to consider the risk, which is 8,000 euros per kilowatt. So we already have a project which is not started, but is financially assessed. So we are not anymore in the promising and contracting phase, but on the reality check of how it will cost to deliver in the UK. And the current estimate is double the worst estimate that is officially used by EDF and the government when they plan for new projects.
There is some room for questions for the audience. If you would like, take the opportunity. Yes? Jiří Marek, the nuclear veterans. We've seen some costs in billions of euros. It would be good to see also the profits of the electricity which is generated, because what we have seen is just a fraction of the profits, of the revenues.
I mean, it's hard to answer because that depends, of course, on market design. And, well, first, market conditions. So projecting the evolution of prices on the electricity market over the next 60 years, because that's the time planned for these reactors to operate. And then market design to ensure some profitability. But, I mean, the way you can look at it in the very long term is that because we have an increasing installed capacity of renewables, which come with the marginal costs, which is very, very low once they are installed, the overall long-term trend is that generating costs, will be very low in the next decades. And even, as I said, even a projection of 70 euros per megawatt hour, which is what EDF is planning for the new EPR2s, based on these very optimistic construction cost estimate that I filed, even that would prove too costly to be profitable in the long term in a market that is dominated by renewables. That is the current framework. So, I mean, from a global perspective, it's not going to be profitable. For it to be profitable, you need to design the market so that you guarantee that the operators will can apply tariffs that cover the costs, but that would be on the expense of the of other operators and end users, of course.
Děkuji moc. Ještě jeden poslední dotaz v téhle části.
Thank you. One more question.
Yeah, hi. I guess this is difficult to tell even for you, but you mentioned the EPR 1200 and the EPR2 both being under development.
Sorry.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So, and the question is, how long could this take? I mean, I know it's difficult, but you said next year the generic design will be completed for the EPR2. And how long could this take to have design so much completed that it could be, started constructing, like, for example, here in the Czech Republic? It seems to be years, if I understood this properly.
I mean, it's hard to say how much it would take to get to a final approved generic design, which then would need to be turned into a specific site-specific design. That would take years. but I mean, a simple benchmark is that even for EPR2 in France, the estimate is that it could not be built and started up before 2035. Which is the official number. The more realistic estimate, if everything goes right, is 37. And I don't see any project being exported, being completed before that. Plus, you have the risks that some things go wrong. We experienced this with the EPR being built. And if things go wrong and there are difficulties, of course, France will prioritize its domestic project. So the risk of delays and overcost for exporting projects is even higher. So I would say 37 is the earliest, very optimistic deadline. And there's a risk that things go much wronger than that.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation and for your answers. And the floor is with the next speaker and the next panelist. It's Tim Judson, the Nuclear Information Resources Service Director, who will talk about the perspectives of the nuclear technology export from the United States of America.